Okay, so good morning. So today is Yevamot Daf Dalid. Yesterday, we concluded with the derivation of the two main rules in our Mishnah. So our Mishnah had four rules. We went over them yesterday. I'm just going to go over the two main ones that it taught. So first is that there are 15 relationships that a potential Yavam, again, a Yavam is the surviving brother who may potentially perform either yibum or chalitza with the widow of the brother who died without any children. And so, there are 15 relationships that a potential yavam could have with the deceased brother's widow that will exempt him from yibum and chalitza. Now, there are actually more than that, but these are the 15 that also have the additional rule that we're about to say. And that's rule number 2, and that is that any co-wives of that widow or eventual co-wives of co-wives, and as we recall, what that means is that the widow with whom they have a relationship. So again, the simple one is Reuven's daughter Dinah marries his brother Levi. Levi is also married to Leah, and now Levi dies without any children. So his two widows, Dinah and Leah, are now available for Yibum. Of course, Reuven can't do Yibum with either of them because one of them is his daughter and one of them is his daughter's co-wife. Now, the other brother, Yehuda, could do Yibum with either of them. And so let's say he does Yibum with Leah. Well, now Leah is married to Yehuda, and let's say Tamar is also married to Yehuda. And so now we have Leah and Tamar are married to Yehuda, and unfortunately, Yehuda dies as well without any children. And now it's back to Reuven. Well, Reuven cannot marry Leah because she was a co-wife of his daughter Dinah, and he can't even marry Tamar because Tamar was a co-wife of Leah. So that is the rule number 2 in our Mishnah. So those were the two main rules in our Mishnah, and we explained that rule number 1 that is derived from the extra word aleha in Vayikra 18:18, that is dealing with the prohibition of marrying two sisters. And aleha is also a word that is used in connection with yibum. And the second rule, rule number 2, is derived from the fact that soror in that same verse in Vayikra 18:18 is also, which indicates sort of like a co-wife situation. So that word is also really not necessary. And so as a result, they co-wives are also part of the prohibition. So now the Gemara is going to say that, well, that implies, right? This new lesson implies that if we didn't have this lesson, then we would say that that you could marry two sisters as a result of Yibum. You could marry even your daughter as a result of Yibum. Okay, and so we're going to say that that is based on the principle that we generally have in the Torah, that a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment. Now, when we do that, we're going to have two questions, and the Gemara is going to only take the second of those questions today. Tomorrow, we'll deal with the first of those questions. So let's take a look. So we are now 6 lines up, third word on the line, taima. Taima de kasav rachmana aleha. That the whole reason that we say that the surviving brother cannot do yibum, and as a result, yibum and chalitza are not applicable to a sister of your wife, to your wife's sister. So the reason that we said that is because of the word aleha, implying halav hachi. If we didn't have that word, ahava amina, I would have thought achot isha miyabemet, that you could do yibum with your wife's sister. So my taima, why would we allow that? Why would the Torah allow that? After all, the Torah has a separate prohibition about marrying two sisters. So shouldn't that be prohibited? We have a contradiction between a positive commandment and a negative commandment. So da amrinan, well, the reason is that we say ase v'doche lo saseh, that we say a positive commandment can come and override a negative commandment. So Amar de Amrinan Ase, what second? But Amar de Amrinan Ase Ase, that when do we say that a positive commandment comes and overrides a losase, a negative commandment? Losase greda. That is only where it's a simple losase, a lower level losase, not a losase sheyeshbo karas midachi. Do we actually say that that we would say a positive commandment can override a kares losase? That's not completely clear. Now that's the question that we are not going to answer. Okay, indeed, Tosos, by the way, asks a very interesting question on this. Tosos asks, one second, doesn't the classic case of Yibum imply a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment that involves a kares? Because ordinarily, if a man marries his brother's former wife, that violates that's a kares violation. You're not allowed to do that. And so it's only in the Yibum situation that we allow it. So doesn't that mean that that Yibum that we do allow an ase to doka elos ase of kares? And Tosos answers, no, you're misunderstanding. There, in the context of marrying a former brother's wife, that is the underlying mitzvah, the whole point of it. So it's not about it being eliminated. It's not that it's overriding. It's Yibum can only apply in this way. The only possibility of having Yibum is to marry the brother's former wife, the brother's widow. So it would not be the basis to learn out to the rest of the Torah. So you would not be able to learn from this. So that's what Tosos does there. But I will note, and I have it on the screen, that the Ramban has a very interesting, we ask the question, why should an ase docha a los ase? Why should a positive commandment override a negative commandment? And the Ramban has a very interesting explanation in Sefer Shmos in Parakaf Pasukhet, that it discusses where he discusses this concept, and he says that positive commandments are an expression of our love for God, whereas the negative observance of negative commandments are expressions of our fear of God. So these two thoughts, and recognizing that love of God is more powerful than fear of God, and a more positive thing than fear of God, Ramban suggests that, well, when we have these two concepts in conflict, well, we want the positive of the love of God to override the negative of the fear of God. And so as a result, we'll have the positive commandment override the negative commandment. And this now helps us also understand how this concept of ase docha los ase, of the positive commandment overriding the negative commandment, how that or why that is true, notwithstanding the fact that somebody is punished more for violating a negative commandment than violating a positive commandment. In general, positive commandments have no punishment whatsoever. And so as a result, the point is that when we fail to observe our love of God, so we're not expressing our feelings towards God in the best way. But when we fail to express our fear of God, well, then all of a sudden now our fear of God is the worst possible thing. We're not we're actually very low. So as a result, everything makes sense. It makes sense that we punish violations of negative commandments, because that is you're not even meeting the basic requirements. Whereas when it comes to positive commandments, that's something that's just an enhanced relationship with God. So on the other hand, when it comes to which are we going to prefer, if an assay and a lotase come in conflict, well, then we want to express the higher level of connection with God. So I thought that was just so nice that I wanted to share it. Okay, so now again, question number one that the Gemara is asking is, isn't this true only for an ordinary negative commandment, not for a kares prohibition? In which case, how could we say that it would potentially apply to yibum with with your wife's sister? Shouldn't that not apply? Shouldn't we say that it doesn't apply? Meaning, why would you need the word aleha in the first place? But now we'll take the second question, and that will be the one that we'll deal with the rest of today. Visu, and moreover, losasa greda minalan dedachi. 1 second. How do we even know in the first place that a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment? Where do we see that in the Torah? And so that's what we're going to spend the rest of today on. This is one of the fundamental piece in Gemara about this concept of ase docha los ase. So now we turn to Dalet Amud Aleph, and we say, the chsiv lo silba shatnes. We have two verses that are going to deal with, one is a prohibition and one is a positive commandment. And we're going to say that we see that the juxtaposition of the two is going to indicate that we can violate one when they do the other. So in verse number 1, it says, Lo silba shatnes. You should not wear shatnes. That's wool and linen together. And then in the next verse, and this is all in Dvarim Kaf Bet, Psukim Yud Aleph and Yud Bet, Gedilim Ta'azelecha. It says that you should make tzitzis. So what is the implication? The implication is that you should make tzitzis even if there's shatnez. Rabbi Elazar, smuchim min haTorah minayin. Okay, 1 second. Well, that we're going to say this is a lesson from a juxtaposition. So Rabbi Elazar says, how do I know that juxtaposition matters and that we can learn something out? Shnei Amar, because it says in Tehillim, smuchim la'ad le'olam, asuyim be'emes v'yashar, that when you have things that are joined forever and for eternity, so they're fashioned in truth and uprightness. So that shows this. So again, it's like a cute lesson that we're taking from this pasuk, that that it's saying, even though it's not referring to obviously a joint psukim, but we're going to apply it to joint psukim. When you have joint psukim, when you have two psukim one after the other, they are fashioned in truth and uprightness, meaning that there is a truth to that combination. V'amar Rav Sheshes, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So minayim li Yevamot shenaflo v'nei mukashchen she'ein chos min al osa. So now we're going to bring another proof to show another example of where indicate some kind of lesson. So the lesson is that so the question is, how do I know that somebody who is repulsive, mukashchin, it means that they have been afflicted with boils. So this is somebody who is very, very repulsive, and we're not going to force any woman to marry a mukashchin. That's just the way it is. So she'ein chos minosa. So we don't muzzle the woman. We allow her to say, I do not want to marry this man. Shnei Amar, because we see again also in Dvarim Perek Kaf Hey Psukim Daled and Vav, Daled and Hey, that it says Shnei Amar Lo Sachsom Short B'Disho. You should not muzzle an animal when it's doing the threshing. And Usmichle, and right next to it says Ki Yeshvu Achim Yachdav, when you have brothers dwell together, and it tells of the halachot of Yibum. So we see that the halachos of Yibum, we learn something out about them from the law that is immediately preceding it in the previous pasuk, which deals with threshing and not allowing not muzzling your ox, meaning your ox needs to be able to eat while it's doing the threshing. So V'amar of Yosef, Afiu l'man delo darish smuchim ba'alma. Rav Yosef says even one who generally does not say that we learn from two psukim that are juxtaposed to next to each other. The Mishnah Torah, when it comes to Mishnah Torah in the Gemara refers to Dvarim. So when it comes to Dvarim, Darish, there we do, in fact, teach the about juxtapositions. To Rabbi Yehuda, but Alma lo Darish, because we found that in fact there's a Rabbi Yehuda does not generally. We will see. It will prove this in a moment. Does not generally learn from two psukim that are next to each other, but Mishnah Torah Darish. But he does do so in Sefer Dvarim. So So a second, let's prove everything we just said. We want to prove that Rabbi Yehuda does not actually use juxtaposition elsewhere in the Torah, and he does use it in Dvarim. So how do I know that he doesn't use it generally, Tanya? Because we have a brisa. Ben Azai Omer, Ben Azai says, we have one pasuk that says, don't allow a sorceress to live. And in addition, we say in the next pasuk it says that anyone who lies with an animal should be put to death. So these are psukim in Shmot, Perek Kafbet, psukim, I believe Yud Zayin and Yud Chet. So Samchu Inyan Lo. So we say that these two passages are connected to one another. Mash Shokev and Behema Beskila. So just as somebody who sleeps with an animal is liable for stoning, so so too a sorceress is liable for stoning. So Amar la Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and again Rabbi Yehuda is the one. So again, Ben Azai has used smichas psukim, the connection of two psukim that are next to each other in Shmot. But now we want to show that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't do that outside of Sefer Dvarim. So Rabbi Yehuda responds to him, is it really because of the juxtaposition of those two psukim that we're going to take this woman out for skila? No, that's not the reason. Ella ov yidoni b'chal mechashvim hayu. Rather, it's because ov and yidoni are other categories of sorcerers, and about them it says in Vayikra Parakaf that they get stoned. So when we have the rule in Sefer Shmot about a sorceress, so the sorceress's punishment is told to us in Sefer Vayikra. You don't need to rely on the juxtaposition of those verses. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda is hesitant to rely on smichas psukim outside of Dvarim. Now, okay, so we got to finish our brisa, and then we'll continue with the proof about Rabbi Yehuda's position. Vilama yatsu. So, one second, why did the pasuk in Vayikra specifically mention the ov and the yidoni for skila? Lahakish lahem v'lomer lacha. It was in order to connect them and to tell you ma ov yidoni b'skila av mekashvei b'skila. So too, anybody who performs any kind of sorcery is also going to get skila. Okay, so now that we've shown that Rabbi Yehuda does not in fact hold of smuchim outside of Dvarim. Now we need to show that he does hold of smuchim in Dvarim. Or Mishnah Torah minalan to Darish. How do we know that Rabbi Yehuda does use juxtapositions in Dvarim? Ditanan, because we have a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah that we're going to learn later in Maseches Yevamos. No say Adam anusas aviv umufutas aviv. So a man is allowed to marry the woman that his father violated, or the woman that was seduced by his father. So that is so again. If we will have Yaakov and Reuven. So Yaakov seduces a woman, and now the question is, can Yaakov's son Yosef marry that woman? So Anusas beno umuftas beno. 1 second. And a person is allowed to do the same with respect to a woman that was violated by his son. So again, in the same example, if Yosef was the one who either raped or seduced a woman, and now Yaakov comes and wants to marry her, according to the Tanna Kama, that is permitted. Rabbi Yehuda oser ba'anusas aviv umuftas aviv. However, Rabbi Yehuda says that when it comes to the father, if the father is the one who violated the woman or who seduced her, so then the son is not allowed to marry her. Why? V'amar of Gidol Amarav, my time with the Rabbi Yehuda. What was that? What's the reason of Rabbi Yehuda? Because Diksiv lo yikach ish es eshes aviv v'lo yigaleh kanaf aviv. Right? The Torah says in Dvarim, Dvarim Parakaf Gimel Pasuk Aleph, it says you cannot uncover. You don't marry the wife of your father, and don't uncover the robe of your father. So what's the kanaf shira aviv lo yigaleh? That the point of the additional language of kanaf aviv is telling us that you don't have even somebody that your father only had intimate relations with. You're not allowed to marry that person either. Now, how do I know that this pasuk is designed to cover somebody who was raped by the father? So because you take a look at the prior verse. That when it comes to somebody who takes advantage of a woman, then not only are they obligated to marry the woman, but and this is because in those days that was sort of viewed as the most progressive and protective of the woman, but you also owe the father of the woman 50 silver pieces. So the point is, usmich le logi kachish, and we've connected two psukim. So the prior pasuk in Parakaf Bet, pasuk Chavtet, it says that it deals with a rape situation, and so as a result, we see that when whether it's a rape or seduction, the point is that that the juxtaposition of that discussion to this available language of lo yigaleh kanaf aviv. What does that come to teach us? That's going to tell us that the son of somebody who seduces or rapes a woman is not allowed to marry that woman. So in second, what about the rest of the people? Why does the Tanna Kama disagree with this position? V'Rabbanan, my time, hava smichle amrat. So in second, if in fact this is a juxtaposition, why don't they also agree? Why do they say that there is no prohibition? So hashta de lo samichle, because it's not actually juxtaposed, right? Diksiv lo yikach ish es eshes aviv bintayim, because between lo yigaleh kanaf aviv and the prior pasuk of v'nasan ha'ish hashochevi mala avia na'ara chamishim kesef, between those two parts of verses, it also gives you something in the middle, and so that something in the middle disconnects it. And so as a result, the shomeres Yevamot medaber, the pasuk is telling us that if, for example, the father's brother passes away, so we'll have Yaakov and Esav. Esav is married to we'll just call her Sarah. So Esav is married to Sarah, and now Esav dies without children, and now so Sarah is now a potential shomeres yavam to Yaakov. Yaakov should marry Sarah in order to fulfill the family name of Esav. And now the issue is, what can Yosef, if Yosef were to jump in and marry her instead? Well, he's not supposed to do that. And so that is what the pasuk is telling us. That's according to the rabbis, according to the Tanakama, who says that that the fact that the father seduces or violates somebody does not prohibit that woman to marry the son. So 1 second. Now, what 1 second, because you might say, well, anyone who is a shomeres yavam is not allowed to have relations with anybody else. So the answer is that in fact you're not allowed to have relations with that. No, that is true. But now the son would violate two prohibitions if he had relations with her. He would have one violation for having relations with a shomeres yavam, somebody who is supposed to do yibum or chalitza with someone else. So that would be problem number one. And problem number two would be he would be violating lo yigalek kanaf aviv, because she is dedicated for his father. So that would be another violation. It would be a second violation. So uba Mishnah Torah, my time at the Darish. Now, we've said that according to Rabbi Yehuda, that he does derive things from juxtaposed verses in Sefer Dvarim, unlike the rest of Chumash. Well, why is that? So we're going to give two answers and then we'll explain them. So either because it's obvious. What's the obvious? I'll explain it and we'll see it in detail in a moment. It's obvious because what is the nature of Sefer Dvarim? Sefer Dvarim is Moshe's speeches at the direction, we understand it as being at the direction of God. And so as a result, there was flexibility to put anything wherever we wanted. There was no requirement to have A followed by B followed by C. You could have A, C, B, D. You didn't need it to be in a particular order. And so as a result, that shows that it's evident that we needed to, that you should be able to learn it from Dvarim. Or you could say it's because in Sefer Dvarim, a lot of the things that are taught there aren't necessary to be taught there. So those are the two possibilities. So either because, so for example, in the case of we're saying that it's obvious, meaning the point is that this verse could have been dealt with if God wanted to. God could have dealt with this verse in Sefer Vayikra. Why did it why did God wait to command it until Dvarim? The point is that we were supposed to learn something from it. Or you could say that again, it's because it's not necessary. So we see that it must be that it was made that it was, and now we're turning to Dalet Amabet. It must be that the lesson was the verse was specifically left there in order to make it available for a juxtaposition. So okay, so now again, so what have we done? What we've done is we've provided the source for the concept of ase, that a ase is dochalos ase, that a positive commandment can come and override a negative commandment, and that it is based on this concept of juxtaposition. And even the one opinion that says we don't actually do juxtaposition agrees that we do juxtapositions in Dvarim, which is where Lo Silba Shatnes is and Gedilim Taselecha. So we can learn this juxtaposition. That is what we've done so far. The Gabi Tzitzis Nami. But now we want to make sure that we understand how Rabbi Yehuda, who says again that we don't generally learn from juxtapositions, how come he will allow the juxtaposition in Sefer Devarim when it comes to tzitzis and shatnez? Okay, how come Rabbi Yehuda would allow the juxtaposition to apply by tzitzis and shatnez? The Gabi tzitzis nami. Similarly, also by tzitzis, we can say that why is it that Rabbi Yehuda allows it to happen? Either because the juxtaposition makes things clear, because because Hashem could have enabled any kind of juxtaposition in Sefer Dvarim, and so therefore any juxtaposition should be able to be learned from. Or you could say that the verse is actually necessary, there's actually something unnecessary about the verse. Now, because when it comes to writing the halachas of tzitzis, well, of course, the halachas of tzitzis, much of tzitzis is actually in my bar mitzvah parsha of Shlach, which is, in Sefer Bamidbar. We could have written these rules also in Sefer Bamidbar. It could have also said Gedilim Taselecha in Sefer Bamidbar. So why did it not say it in Sefer Bamidbar? Must be in order to teach us something through juxtaposition. Okay, so that is point number one. The and if you want, you could say because there's something extra here. So michti, let's take a look at the verse. And all right, so now this is it's gonna get a little complicated. Not that complicated, but we're going to we'll go a little slower and get this clear. So michti, let's take a look at the verse that we're going to say is extra. Kasav uveged kilayim shatnez lo ya'ala alecha, right? So the pasuk says that a garment of kilayim, of two items, you should not put on you. Okay, lo silbash shatnez lamanili. Well, why do I need the pasuk? So that's the pasuk that it says in Vayikra in Perek Yud-Tet, pasuk Yud-Tet. So why do we need to repeat lo silbash shatnez? Why do we need to repeat that here? So shma mina la'afnuye. The point is that it's extra. It's extra, and so as a result, it can be used in order to teach us something. So now the Gemara is going to ask, 1 second, we actually see that we learn something from the word silbash, to wear. So we're going to show that maybe it's not necessary. Honey, mitzrach trichi, we actually need both of these verses. Because if the Torah had only written lo ya'ala alecha, that it had only said that you can't have a mixture of shatnez on you, haba amina kol derech ha'ala asa rachmana. I would have thought that any kind of wearing constitutes a problem of shatnez. Va'afilu mochrei kasus, even somebody who's selling garments. What does this person who sells garments do if they're going door to door? Like the famous children's book about this hat seller who wore a big pile of hats, and then the monkey takes them all. But in any event, he wears a big pile of hats. So that they wear all the garments. So when you're wearing garments, not because you're wearing them for warmth, but in order to sort of carry them all, to make it easy for you to carry them. So that is, I would have thought, if it just said lo ya'ala alecha, I would have thought that also constitutes a problem if any of the garments have shatnez. Well, because of Rachmana, lo silba shatnez. So that's why the Torah also says you shall not wear shatnez. So dumya de levisha de ispe hana. It needs to be the type of wearing that actually is forbidden. So as a result, by the way, this has a very important practical ramification, which is that when you go suit shopping and you go to a reliable suit source, so sometimes the suit as they are originally constructed, will have shatnez, will have both wool and linen in it. If you are just trying it on, and therefore you're not actually trying to wear it for benefit, well, then that is a permitted wearing, and that's a practical ramification of this halacha. Because of Rahmana lo silbash. On the other hand, if we had only had the verse of lo silbash, hava amina dafka levisha denafish hanayasa. It's only wearing it, clothing in the ordinary way, that it would be a problem. Aval ha'ala lo. But when it comes to sort of like a blanket, then that's just on you, I might think that that's not a problem, even if you are wearing it for warmth. So kasav rachmana lo yala alecha. So as a result, it needs to teach us lo yala alecha. So what do we have? We've now undermined the fact that this verse with respect to shatnez is actually extra. Now it isn't extra, and if it isn't extra, how can we learn from it? So, and let's just again remind us what are the two things that we've learned from these two verses. What we've learned combined is that in order to violate shatnez, it needs to be you need to be benefiting from the garment in a wearing type of way, meaning in a way, a benefit that is associated with wearing, meaning you need to be putting it on for warmth and for looks, etc. It needs to be something that you a benefit that you get that is tied to wearing, but it does not actually have to be worn. It could even just be on you as long as you're getting that same benefit. So as a result, a shawl would also be a problem, or a blanket would also potentially be a problem if it had both wool and linen. So as a result, again, now we don't have an extra verse. So im kain lift over. So now we're going to try and show that actually the Torah could have written something else, and then we would know it. Im kain lichtav rachmana lo silbash shatnez. We could have written in Sefer Dvarim where it says, again, in Sefer Dvarim, what does it say? Let's just take a look at the full pasuk, right? It says lo silbash shatnez temro fishtim yachtav. We didn't need the words temro fishtim yachtav, right? It could have just said lo silbash shatnez. So temro fishtim lamali. I don't need it to tell us wool and linen. So michti, kasav ubeged kolayim shatnez lo ya'ala alecha. Because what do we have in Sefer Vayikra? In Sefer Vayikra, it tells us that a garment that has a mixture of shatnez you can't wear. The Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, and we learned in the yeshiva, it was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, hoel v'nemaru the Torah stam begadim. Whenever the Torah refers to garments, ufarat lacha kasav be'echad mehem semer ufishtim, and then it tells you about one of those garments. It's talking about wool or linen. So I've called semer ufishtim. So as a result, every reference to a garment is also to a garment of wool or linen. So semer ufishtim. Because of Rahman Alamali. So as a result, we didn't need to tell us wool and linen in Sefer Dvarim. We would know wool and linen because the principle that Rabbi Yishmael's yeshiva taught is that all wool and linen is covered in the word beged. So Shema Mina Lafnuye. So now we do have the fact that we have extra words, the fact that it didn't need to tell us wool and linen. So as a result, now those words are available for our juxtaposition. But Kasi, it's strict. 1 second. We still do need to tell us the wool and linen, the Gemara points out. Why? So Salkadaita Kamina, I might have thought Allahi, that when it comes to putting the garment on you, Delo Nafish Hanasa, that it doesn't provide a lot of benefit. Visha denafash haniyasa kol trei mine asa rachmana. But when it comes to a garment that has lots of benefit, maybe all kinds of mixtures are prohibited, not just wool and linen. So kasav rachmana temer ufishtim. That's why the Torah needed to write temer ufishtim in Sefer Dvarim to tell us that it's specifically and only wool and linen. So im kain lishta kramina. No, the pasuk wouldn't have needed to say anything. V'tesi shatnis mahalala, and we would have a gzera shava between the two references to shatnis. So we didn't, in fact, need to say Samro Fishtim. The fact that both verses reference shatnis, we would make a juxtaposition. We would make a gzera shava, and as a result, that we would connect the two verses, and we would know that just as the verse in Vayikra is referring to wool and linen, we would also know that the verse in Dvarim is referring to wool and linen. So we've again shown that wool and linen, the reference to wool and linen in Sefer Dvarim was not necessary. So Vitana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, time of the Kazav Rachmana, Tsemro Fishtim. Okay, so you've explained the story according to the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. That the reason is that we've got the extra words of Tsemro Fishtim. Halav Hachi, if without this, Kalayim Betzitzis, Hava Mina de Asa Rachmana. I might have thought that Kalayim, a mixture of wool and linen, would be prohibited when it comes to tzitzis. 1 second. You've been telling us that the whole lesson is that bigdeihem beged refers to wool and linen. Well, we have a reference to beged in connection with tzitzis. So doesn't that tell us that a wool and linen are okay when it comes to making tzitzis? Right? If Amar Rachmana Avid like Techeles, Utecheles Amarahu, right? So now if every beged means a beged of if every time the beged is referenced in the Torah, it means a garment of wool or linen, and now we also have to put techeles on that garment, and the techeles is always made out of wool. So then, doesn't that show that tzitzis, that the Torah itself is saying that tzitzis is okay even with shatnez, and that the Torah directly is telling us that an asay is doka alot asay. We don't need to rely on the juxtaposition of the two verses in the first place. We could just rely on the fact that beged implies, according to the Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael, the beged implies both wool or linen, and so as a result, we know that the beged could even be linen, and the techeles is got to be wool. So we can see that we have a garment that is made of wool and linen, and that is allowed in the Torah. So, and just as an aside, how do I know that the techeles is wool? How do I know that the techeles is actually made out of wool? Because we have in throughout Tanakh, we know that sheish is actually linen. The implication is that techeles is something else. Techeles amrahu. So as a result, the techeles needs to be wool. So so now again, so what have we done? What we've done is we've shown that maybe you don't even need the juxtaposition of the two verses in Dvarim. Maybe we could try and learn that the concept of asay doka lo tasay is just from the fact that we say asulahem tzitzit al kanfei bigdeihem, that because you're required to make tzitzis on the corners of a garment, and a garment means wool or linen, and the tzitzis are going to be wool, that means you could combine linen and wool, and that's okay. So no, it's strict. We do need our juxtaposition because the lesson that I might have just said, Vasulahem tzitzit al kanfei bigdeihem, is not a good lesson. I might have thought like Rava. What does Rava say? The Rava Rami, because he noted the following contradiction. Ksiv hakanaf. It says in one verse that it's got to be the corner, which suggests min kanaf, meaning that the tzitzis should be made of the same type of fiber as the corner of the garment, meaning the strings should be made as the same as the main part of the garment. Uksiv samar ufishti. But then elsewhere it says that wool and linen are permitted. So how do we combine these two ideas? If the tzitzis are supposed to be the same type of garment, well then you can't possibly have a combination of wool and linen. So Ha ketzad samro fishtin potrin. So the idea is that when you have threads of wool, the tzitzis themselves, the strings, if the strings are either wool or linen, well then, according to Rava's explanation, then bein b'mina non ben shelo b'mina. It doesn't make a difference whether the garment, the beged part of the tzitzis, it doesn't make a difference what kind of garment the garment is. Shar minim. Those can be any kind of I'm sorry. So those can be any kind of garment, any kind of material. So, for example, if you have linen garment, I'm sorry, if you have a silk garment, you can have wool or linen strings as your tzitzis. But shar minim, if you want to make any other kind of tzitzis, if you want to make tzitzis out the strings out of silk, b'minan potrin, they can only be used, those silk strings can only be used with a silk garment. Shelo b'minan ein potrin. But when it comes to other kinds of garments, they will not be used. So while you can use wool or linen strings, fringes on a garment of any type, if you want to use cotton strings, it needs to be a cotton garment. If you want to use linen, silk strings, it's got to be a silk garment. That is Rava's lesson, and Rava, and so as a result, because Rava has essentially avoided the need for shatnez, so now as a result, that teaches us that we actually do need the juxtaposition of the two verses, because it doesn't have to imply the fact that the beged needs to be samuel fishtim does not imply that it has to involve shatnez. So now the Gemara asks a very interesting question. But you're using Rava to answer a question about the Tana of Rabbi Yishmael, but in fact, the Tana from the Academy of Rabbi Yishmael doesn't agree with Rava's interpretation. Why? Because Rava allows tzitzis to be made out of any material, but the Tana of the May Rabbi Yishmael, he says that you only can use wool or linen as your tzitzis, right? Garments that are garments that are not made out of wool or linen, they don't even require tzitzis at all. So it can't be that we're going to describe. It can't be the description that Rava offers of saying that each garment's tzitzis have to be the same material as the garment itself. That doesn't apply to Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, because he doesn't allow any garment other than wool or wool or linen. So itzrich. So as a result, we say no. In fact, it is necessary. It is necessary, and you cannot derive. So again, the question is: so let the Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel learn the concept of aseh docha lo saseh from the fact that the tzitzis have to be on a beged, and beged means wool or linen, and the fringes are wool. So since the beged can be linen and the fringes are wool, that shows that you can have shatnez in your tzitzis. So the answer is no. That isn't a good proof, and we actually need the juxtaposition of the two psukim next to each other. And why? Because salka daita kamina. I might have thought ki diyuka de Rava. Fine. We know that Rava has a broader understanding of what the garment can be for your tzitzis, but that same approach can explain to us why learning just from the usage of the word beged in connection with tzitzis won't be able to provide us another source for aseh docha lo saseh, because what is the lesson that Rava teaches? Hakanaf min kanaf. It is from the corner means that it's got to have the same thread as the corner. So v'hagi kama Rahmana. So as a result, what the Torah is telling us it is, if we didn't have the juxtaposition that allows shotness, the Torah would be telling us avid late tzemer blutzemer, that when you have a wool garment, you use tzitzis made out of wool. Avidas tzemer l'tzemer saveh, and when you make the wool threads for the wool garment, you dye one of them blue, like techeles. So that's how you create the techeles. However, about tzemer lefishtim, ufishtim letzemer lo. But you're not going to use a wool fringes for a linen garment or linen fringes for a wool garment. So, and that's why kasav rachmana tzemer ufishtim. So as a result, the Torah wrote the words tzemer ufishtim to be extra in Sefer Devarim, da'afilu tzemer lefishtim ufishtim l'tzemer, in order to have that juxtaposition of shotness with tzitzis, in order to tell us that actually when you use wool threads for a linen garment and linen threads for a wool garment, all of that is okay, and it's okay even though it's considered shotness, because we say the principle of aseh docha lo saseh. A positive commandment can override a negative commandment. So now, key to our justification for learning aseh docha lo taseh was the principle of beged, implying wool and linen. So that was the teaching of a Tana of Yeshiva of Rebbe Yishmael. But now tomorrow we're going to look at the rabbis who disagree with this teaching and have to come up with a new derivation for the concept of aseh docha lo saseh. So again, we're in this detailed discussion of this very important principle of when does a positive commandment override a negative commandment, and we have derived it initially. We've derived it from the juxtaposition of two verses: one verse that prohibits shotness, and another verse that effectively allows shotness in connection with tzitzis. And so that juxtaposition has taught us the principle generally of a positive commandment overriding a negative commandment. But the ability to learn from those two verses was dependent on the words tzemer ufishtim being extra, and those words were extra only according to Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael. So tomorrow we'll see, what do you do if you don't say that those words are extra? How do you derive the principle of aseh docha lo taseh? So that's what we'll be covering tomorrow, and looking forward to seeing you tomorrow night at our wonderful siyum for a Seder Moed, and I look forward to sharing some words of Torah there with you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good Shabbos to you and the family. See you soon.
Thank you so much. Have a great Shabbos. Be well. Bye-bye.